Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content. Subscribe and turn on notifications.
From a very young age, Tessa learned that dreaming about love was a luxury reserved for people who already possessed the basics. Her childhood was defined by a hollow architecture of absences. Absence of food, absence of stability, and the total absence of peace. She retained a vivid, high-definition memory of staring into a refrigerator that contained nothing but a single withered lemon and a jug of tap water, pretending she was not hungry, just so her mother would not succumb to a panic attack. She grew up to the soundtrack of broken promises. There was the percussive rhythm of neighbors knocking on the door, demanding repayment, and the metallic clinking of her mother counting loose change on the laminate countertop at the end of each day, calculating if they could afford the bare minimum to survive the next 24 hours. Through the haze of those years, one phrase repeated in that house like a survivalist mantra: marry a man with resources. Love does not pay the electric bill. It was the anthem of their survival. Tessa did not know exactly what love was. It was an abstract concept she could not afford. But she understood fear with the intimacy of a sibling. She knew the fear of shivering in a coat indoors because the heat was cut. The fear of the stomach's hollow ache. The fear of ending up exactly like her mother, worn down, frantic, and prematurely aged by debt. Consequently, from her first forays into dating, she assessed potential partners not through chemistry, but through a lens of risk assessment. If a man had a 5-year plan, a solvent bank account, and a career with an upward trajectory, she simulated interest. If they were dreamers, artists, or lived without health insurance, she withdrew. Choosing security was not vanity. It was a biological imperative. She watched her peers fall for musicians and freelancers, only to return to their parents' basements, drowning in debt. Tessa swore she would be the outlier. She desired a life where bills were auto-drafted before they were due, where the refrigerator was a cornucopia of produce, where she never had to mask panic. With a smile, at 29, she met Silas Vance. Silas was not an architect, nor was he in software. He was a corporate risk analyst for a multinational logistics firm. His entire existence was predicated on the identification of variables, the calculation of potential loss, and the implementation of safeguards. He was 34, possessed a sterile, high-rise condominium in the financial district, and his life operated with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Silas was not the type to write poetry or purchase flowers without a calendar prompt. He was a man of logic. When he looked at Tessa, he did not see a muse. He saw an investment opportunity with high potential yield, provided the initial instability could be corrected. He saw the hunger in her eyes, not for him, but for the safety he represented. And Silas, being a man who valued control above all else, found this acceptable. A woman who needed him for survival was a woman who would not leave. When he proposed, 6 months after their first calculated dinner date, Tessa said yes. She felt a profound, chemical sense of relief, as if a heavy load had been removed from her spine. It felt as though her mother's ghost had guided the decision. The first year of the merger, the marriage, was efficient. Silas was predictable, and to Tessa, predictability was a narcotic. They constructed grocery lists, established investment portfolios, and scheduled annual objectives. The car was serviced every 5,000 miles. The mortgage was paid on the first of the month. The house was quiet, antiseptic, and functional. There were no arguments. Because Silas did not argue, he corrected. It was exactly what Tessa thought she wanted. But Silas, ever the observer, noticed the microscopic shifts before she did. He noticed that the gratitude which had initially shone in her eyes was beginning to depreciate. He watched her across the dinner table as she stared at the perfectly roasted chicken, her expression absent. He knew the data of human behavior better than she knew herself. He knew that when a starving animal is finally fed, it eventually stops being grateful for the food and starts looking for a way out of the cage. Silas maintained a mental ledger of their interactions, By the third year, the metrics were trending downward. The safety that Tessa had once craved had metastasized into a suffocating routine. The days bled into a gray slurry of repetition. Their conversations were circular, trapping them in a loop of logistical maintenance. Retirement funds, home repairs, social obligations, and tax strategies. There was no margin for error. And consequently, no room for life. Silas observed the symptoms of her restlessness with clinical detachment. Tessa began to arrive late to their scheduled dinners, claiming traffic. Though Silas had checked the traffic patterns and knew the routes were clear, she began to feign forgetfulness regarding simple tasks, forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning, neglecting to refill the water filter, just to see if he would react. She was poking the beast, searching for a reaction, a spark, even if it was anger. But Silas remained unchanged. He did not get angry. Anger was an inefficient use of energy. When she forgot the dry cleaning, he simply wore a different suit and made a note to hire a delivery service. When she tried to initiate arguments about his emotional distance, he responded with practical solutions. "Have you attempted to itemize what is causing your distress?" he asked one evening, as she sat on the edge of the sofa, looking desperate. "If we identify the root cause, we can engineer a solution." He saw her flinch. It was a rejection of his logic, which he found irrational. She wanted him to scream, to hold her, to be messy. But Silas Vance was not messy. He assumed that if the logistics were sound, the marriage was sound. Gradually, Silas watched as she retreated into a private world. She began to miss something she could not articulate to him. It was not just passion, it was volatility. She missed the electric current of risk. She watched couples on the street fighting and making up, and Silas saw the envy in her gaze. She remembered her mother saying, "Love does not fill your stomach." But now, observing Tessa from his armchair, Silas imagined her thinking, "When the stomach is full, what fills the silence?" In public, Tessa played the role of the immaculate wife. She posted photographs on social media, smiling beside Silas at Michelin-starred restaurants, celebrating birthdays with standardized cakes, and captions that read like greeting cards. But Silas knew she was performing. He could feel the hollowness when she held his hand. It was the grip of an actress who had forgotten her lines, and was improvising until the curtain fell. One evening, while Silas was reviewing a risk assessment for a shipping merger in the Pacific, he looked up to see Tessa washing dishes. She paused, looking at him in the reflection of the dark window. "This is the life I chose," her expression seemed to scream. "But did this life choose me?" Silas returned his gaze to his laptop. He knew the instability was growing. A less disciplined man might have panicked, might have tried to woo her with grand gestures. Silas did not. He simply adjusted his risk model. He began to diversify his emotional assets, withdrawing his investment in her loyalty, and preparing for the inevitable breach of contract. He watched her daydream. He saw her staring at nothing, smiling at scenarios that did not exist. The marriage continued to run like a clock. And precisely because of that mechanical perfection, Tessa no longer felt like a cog in the machine. She felt like a foreign object, jamming the gears. The breach occurred on a Tuesday. Silas reconstructed the event later, piecing it together from credit card timestamps and the subtle shifts in her behavioral patterns. Tessa had left the house with no intention of deviance. Her objective was routine, the acquisition of household supplies at the local market. It was a mundane trip, performed on autopilot. As she navigated the aisles, a bag of produce slipped from her grasp, spilling lemons across the linoleum floor. Before she could retrieve them, a variable entered the equation. His name was Caleb. He was not a man of resources. He was a barista who played guitar in a mediocre band on weekends. He wore denim that had not been laundered recently, and a t-shirt with a fading print. He possessed a smile that required no effort, a sharp contrast to the calibrated expressions Tessa saw at home. Silas would later learn that Caleb helped her retrieve the lemons. He made a trivial comment about the structural integrity of the shopping carts. Tessa laughed. It was not the polite, Brittle laugh she used at Silas's corporate dinners, it was a genuine sound. A release of pressure. Caleb did not measure his time. He spoke as if the day was infinite. He asked her if she lived nearby. Without consulting her internal risk protocols, Tessa confirmed she did. In the following days, Silas noted the irregularities. Tessa began to frequent a coffee shop that was 3 miles out of her way. The first meeting might have been statistical noise. The second, a coincidence. The third, was a pattern. She met Caleb again. They sat at a corner table. Coffee turned into conversation, and conversation drifted into dangerous territory. Caleb spoke of music, travel, and childhood memories without the burden of trauma. He asked her questions and actually listened to the answers. Not to solve them, but to experience them. For Tessa, it was intoxicating. Silas observed the change in her biology. Her serotonin levels appeared elevated. She was humming in the shower. She began to purchase clothing that was not functional. Dresses with lower necklines. Fabrics that were softer to the touch. She mentioned to Caleb that she enjoyed vintage cinema. The next day, Caleb arrived with a DVD of a film she had referenced. A borrowed gift, costing nothing. Yet she treated it like a diamond. I just wanted an excuse to see you, Caleb had said. Silas, analyzing this later, recognized the strategy. It was the allure of the low-stakes gambler. Caleb had nothing to lose. So he could bet everything on a smile. The digital trail began. Random text messages arrived on her phone at irregular intervals. Jokes. Photographs of street art. Lyrics to songs. Silas saw her smiling at her screen during dinner. She tilted the phone away from him, a new security measure she had not employed before. She began to lie. I am going to have dinner with a friend from the yoga studio, she said one evening. Silas looked at her. He knew she had not attended yoga in 3 weeks. Which friend? He asked. His voice flat. Sarah, she replied too quickly. You don't know her. Enjoy, Silas said, turning a page of his report. She went to dinner with Caleb. A walk followed, which terminated in the parking lot of a budget motel. From that moment, the boundary was dissolved. Tessa had crossed the line from dissatisfaction to active betrayal. She felt alive with Caleb. He noticed things Silas ignored. He reacted to her ideas with enthusiasm rather than analysis. He spoke of living in the moment, of taking risks. Tessa surrendered to this philosophy like a drowning woman inhaling water. She believed she was finding herself. Silas, observing the growing distance, knew she was simply losing her position. She wanted Caleb's chaos. But she wanted to retain Silas's roof. She wanted to live 2 parallel lives. She did not realize that Silas Vance did not share. Silas did not operate on suspicion. He operated on verification. After 4 weeks of watching Tessa drift, hearing the repetitive, poorly constructed lies, and noting the unexplained gaps in her timeline, Silas decided to conduct an audit. He did not scream. He did not confront her with trembling hands. No. He simply purchased a high-fidelity surveillance system. He installed cameras in the strategic blind spots of their home, the living room, the hallway, and the master bedroom. He told himself this was not voyeurism, it was quality control. He needed to know the extent of the damage to the asset. And he found it. On the 3rd day of recording, the footage showed Tessa entering the front door. She was not alone. Caleb followed her, looking around the pristine apartment with a mix of awe and mockery. Silas sat in his office, 3 miles away, watching the live feed on a secure monitor. He watched them talk. He watched Tessa laugh, a sound he had not extracted from her in 2 years. He watched them kiss, a frantic, hungry collision of mouths that lacked the precision of his own affection. Then, he watched them disappear into the bedroom. His bedroom. Silas watched the screen for 45 minutes. He did not shed a tear. His heart rate remained within the acceptable resting range of 65 beats per minute. He stared at the empty living room on the screen, waiting for them to re-emerge. He analyzed his emotions. There was a dull ache. Certainly. But it was overshadowed by a profound sense of validation. His model was correct. The asset was defective. The investment had failed. When they finally left the bedroom, Caleb looked smug. Tessa looked flushed. Her hair disheveled. Her eyes bright with the adrenaline of transgression. They shared a drink from Silas's Scotch collection. An 18-year-old single malt that Caleb mixed with tap water. Silas winced. At the waist. He saved the video file. He labeled it Evidence 1. He continued the surveillance for another week. He wanted a comprehensive dataset. He watched her lie to his face when she came home. "How was your day?" Silas asked that night. Cutting a piece of steak with surgical precision. "It was quiet," Tessa said. Smiling. "Just did some cleaning." Silas nodded. "The house does look orderly." He knew that 3 hours prior, she had been pressed against the kitchen island by a man who could not pay his own rent. The strange part, Silas noted, was Tessa's delusion. She believed she could maintain this balance indefinitely. She treated Caleb as a reward for her years of suffering through a stable, funded existence. She did not realize that every lie was a withdrawal from an account that was already overdrawn. Silas prepared the final report. He checked the property deeds. The apartment was in his name. Acquired before the marriage. The prenuptial agreement was watertight. He verified the monthly transfers he made to her parents. A stipend he provided to keep her family's small business solvent. He possessed all the leverage. It was time to execute the liquidation. Silas waited until she returned from yet another dinner with Sarah. It was a Tuesday. The same day of the week the breach had begun. Tessa walked in, humming a melody that Caleb had likely taught her. She carried the scent of cheap cologne and guilt, masked by a layer of floral perfume. Silas was sitting in the living room. His laptop was open on the coffee table. The lights were dimmed. "You're up late," Tessa said, pausing as she removed her coat. She sensed a change in the atmospheric pressure of the room. "Sit down." "Tessa," Silas said. His tone was calm, steady, devoid of inflection. She hesitated, then sat on the edge of the armchair. "Is something wrong? Is it work?" Silas did not speak. He simply turned the laptop screen toward her. He pressed play. The video began. It was the footage from 3 days prior. High definition. Audio enabled. It took Tessa 4 seconds to process the visual data. Her eyes widened, the pupils dilating in shock. The color drained from her face, leaving her with the pallor of a corpse. She watched herself lead Caleb into the house. She heard the things she whispered to him. Complaints about Silas. Mockery of his routines. Declarations of desire for Caleb. She tried to speak. A stammering, incoherent noise escaped her throat. Silas watched her reaction. He did not blink. He was studying the subject under stress. When the video ended, he closed the laptop with a sharp snap. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent apartment. "Silas. I can explain," she began, tears instantly flooding her eyes. "It's not. It was a mistake. I was lost. The marriage is terminated," Silas said. "Effective. Immediately. No. Please. We can talk. We can fix this." She reached out to touch his arm. Silas retracted his arm. "Do not touch me. Respect is a finite resource. Once depleted, it cannot be synthesized. You have depleted it." He stood up, towering over her. "This property belongs to me. You are aware of this. Pack your personal effects. You are leaving. Tonight." "Tonight?" "Silas. I have nowhere to go. That is a logistical problem. You should have calculated before you brought a stranger into my home," he replied. Tessa broke down. She sobbed, begging for forgiveness, promising to change, promising to cut Caleb off. It was a pathetic display. Silas felt a remote sense of pity, like one feels for a bird that has flown into a window pane. "I do not wish to cohabit with someone who has silently dismantled my life," he said. As Tessa went upstairs, dragging her feet, sobbing uncontrollably to pack a suitcase, Silas picked up his phone. He accessed the contact group labeled "In-laws." He attached the video file. No caption. No explanation. Just the raw data. He hit send. He knew exactly what would happen. He had been sending them $2,000 a month to keep their failing hardware store afloat. They relied on him. They idolized him,